Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Had a group of very interesting people all together last week to talk about an issue in regards to a state-owned company in China's investment in a gold mine in the Northwest Territories. Really quite a fascinating conversation. And we talked about other Chinese investments, and we agreed that we'd all get together again and talk about 5G. Which I think a lot of us have heard something about, but I'm not sure if we all know what it's about and what the issues are. And so I've invited this group, appended by one more, back to discuss 5G and the implications on Chinese-Canadian relations. Maybe I could just turn to you and have each one of you just introduce yourself for a minute or so, and then Rob is going to give us an overview of the issue. So maybe I could start with you, Jessica. Introduce yourself to our listeners, please.
Hello, my name is Jessica Shadian. I'm the president and CEO of Arctic 360, which is Canada's only Arctic think tank. And we focus on bringing together Northerners, governments, institutional investors, and others to figure out how to close the critical infrastructure gap in the North. And obviously, any sort of telecommunications, much less 5G, is an issue of critical infrastructure and importance for the North. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Excellent. Madeline, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Madeline Redfern. I'm based here in Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, and I am the COO of Can Arctic Inuit Networks, which is in the process of doing research and development towards building fiber optic networks in the eastern part of Canada's north. And I am also the Northern Executive Director for Arctic 360.
Excellent. Robert.
Hi, I'm Rob Hubert. I'm with the Department of Political Science at the University of Calgary. My major area of focus is on international relations with a specific focus on issues related to Arctic sovereignty and security and what it means for Canada in a rapidly changing Arctic today.
Excellent. And Charles, everyone has introduced themselves. I wonder if you might be able to do the same thing, sir. You're on mute right now.
I'm Charles Burton. I'm a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. My area of specialization is domestic Chinese politics and China's relations with the West.
Excellent. Rob, you were going to give us an overview, if you could, of what the issue on 5G and the implications for Canada are. Please do so, sir.
Well, 5G, of course, represents the new era of communications, and it's the next era in terms of how we have the ability to connect all of our electronic, my family would say leashes, but modes of communications. I mean, it goes beyond just simply cell phones, computers, and sort of personal communications. It also carries over in business, communities, but it's basically how we get in touch with each other. The issue that's really come forward is the amount of control that various companies have been able to execute in terms of their ability to offer different types of services, servers, equipment, infrastructure, when it comes to servicing this new generation of connectivity. And so the ultimate issue is really, to be frank, is that one of the leading companies, of course, is Huawei with China. And what has developed is incredible security considerations that, in fact, that Huawei may be providing information to the Chinese government that will obviously be of a security threat to any country that's received it. And what the issue really comes down to is that we've seen many of our allies, and particularly the Anglo allies, and that includes New Zealand, Australia, United States, and UK, that are very hesitant about moving forward with giving Huawei unfettered access. And Canada is the Anglo country, so to speak, that seems to be hesitating on whether or not to simply say no to Huawei and move on to other suppliers that we've seen our friends and allies do.
We're having a chat about 5G, what the implications are for Canada, particularly in regards to potential Chinese investment via Huawei. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with this esteemed group of experts on the topic in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. Well, this is my second interview with this panel. We had a great conversation a week ago about Chinese state government, state-controlled companies investing in gold mines in the Northwest Territories. And now we're talking about 5G. And Rob has just given us an excellent overview of the issue. Maybe, Charles, I could turn to you and ask you, should we be worried as Canadians in a Chinese company? And you corrected my pronunciation of it, but Huawei, is that correct pronunciation of it? That is investing in potentially 5G across Canada. Do you think the Canadian government, like as Rob has pointed out, some of our other Anglo countries in the world, pass on Huawei's potential investment?
Well, I think one has to understand the difference between Huawei as an entity and its competitors, Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung. Huawei is, a function of the Chinese state. It's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and a lot of people bring up the Chinese 2017 National Intelligence Law that requires that all Chinese citizens collaborate with espionage activities of the Ministry of State Security on demand. But that law, I think, is more or less a pro forma, because if you look at a company like Huawei, it's fully integrated into the Chinese Communist regime. Its most senior administrator is the Huawei Communist Party branch general secretary. And so the purpose of Huawei is not to generate profits for the shareholders, but to serve the overall interests of the Chinese regime. And it really has a symbiotic relationship with the Chinese regime in the sense that the Chinese regime subsidizes Huawei's operations considerably in all sorts of ways, such as the housing for the workers and so on, and simple grants, so that Huawei is able to be highly competitive in its bids for telecommunications around the world. And that's why the Bell and Telus networks are so dominated by Huawei, because Huawei was coming down at 30% lower than other bids. Because of the fact that it enjoys subsidy from the Chinese state. But, in exchange for that, Huawei is expected to pursue the overall regime goals, which, as we know from speeches by the Communist Party General Secretary, involves attempting to restructure global geopolitics so that China will be the dominant power on the planet, because China believes the United States is in terminal decline, and to reorient the global infrastructure through the Belt and Road program to serve the interests of Beijing at the center. So Huawei, on the one hand, is required by the state to serve China's overall goals. And it's also able to draw on all the resources of the state to achieve those goals. So, Huawei can draw on Chinese state intelligence to find out about competitors' R&D, and it can use Chinese state cyber espionage to learn more about competitors' bids, things that the other companies cannot do. BlackBerry, for example, could not call on the Communication Security Establishment of Canada to find out what Samsung is developing or how much it's bidding for, certain installations. And in addition, Huawei is required, of course, to put in the capabilities that the Chinese state, if it had intention, would realize. So from that point of view, Huawei is expected to be available for assisting with the cyber espionage, downloading personnel files, or potentially putting in kill switches into critical infrastructure that would use the 5G technology. So from that point of view, it poses a threat to our sovereignty and security. And then if you look at the company in general, it's been involved in facilitating cyber espionage and surveillance technology that's been oppressing human freedoms, particularly in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs. Its equipment is being exported to non-democratic regimes in the third world to allow third world dictators to adopt Chinese-style surveillance and internet censorship technologies. And the company has been found guilty of theft of intellectual property and bribery and other sort of moral aspects. So you have the moral aspect on the one hand; it's not a reliable, trustworthy partner, and on the other hand, there's the we can't trust that Huawei will not be used by the Chinese state to undermine our security of information and sovereignty. So, all of these things are kind of held in the balance, and certainly, we attempt to alleviate those concerns by requiring that Huawei provide us with their hardware and software solutions for review by the Communications Security Establishment, but I think there's a consensus among technical experts that 5G is such a complicated technology that, unlike earlier generations of telecommunications technology, it's very hard to monitor, and the possibility of installing software updates or backdoor routines is an ever-present concern. So I think compared to the Scandinavian and South Korean options, we have to really look carefully at Huawei 5G. And one other, point, which is that the United States has made it clear that if Canada installs Huawei 5G into our telecommunications network, that we will no longer be able to benefit from shared intelligence through the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Consortium. And Canada is a net importer of intelligence. And so this would be quite a blow for us in terms of control of the border in the north if we're basically frozen out of our collaboration with the United States and our other Five Eyes allies, all of whom have determined that Huawei poses too great a security threat for them to agree to allowing Huawei installations in our allied network. So we would be the only one that would have Huawei 5G.
The argument on the other side, is it that they've got better technology, or is it just cheaper pricing because of the subsidy? What is the counter argument?
The technology is not well regarded. Their security measures, I think GCHQ, which is the British counterpart for the NSA and the CSE, which have a similar arrangement to evaluate their hardware and software solutions, determined that their security measures are very much lacking. So they're cutting corners in security, and they said that the security is sort of a 20-year-old vintage. So the hardware itself and the software is not as secure as that provided by competitors, but you do get the better price. And Huawei, in addition, is able to draw on the resources of the Chinese Communist Party United Front Work Department agencies in Chinese embassy and consulates throughout the country to try and influence decision makers in favor of Huawei. And one can see a number of quite prominent persons who have been engaged by Huawei to assist them in lobbying for getting an acceptance by the government of Canada, including their current president, who was a senior advisor to former Prime Minister Harper, Ali Khan Velshi. So, there's a lot of angles to it, but I think the idea that Huawei is cutting edge technology is a myth. And of course, there's also the moral concerns, or a lot of people who suggest that the downfall of Canadian Nortel was related to, well, we know that the Nortel campus was full of surveillance materials, because when the Department of National Defense purchased that campus after Nortel collapsed, they had to delay moving into it for a considerable period of time because the walls and electronics were full of bugs.
Seriously, really?
Yes, 2 years. But that the suggestion is that was because the Chinese authorities were stealing stuff from, information from Nortel and transferring it to Huawei. But I don't think that there's any evidence that shows that Huawei has it. I think there's some researchers who are comparing some Huawei patent applications with Nortel technology that was in development at that time to try and strengthen the idea that Nortel's collapse was related to Chinese espionage over which related to the rise of Huawei. And Nortel did have a facility in Xi'an in northwestern China that would also have been a vector for transfer of intellectual property and hardware development.
Jessica and Madeline, I understand that you both have some significant concerns in regards to 5G and Huawei in Canada's north. Can you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yes. So, I mean, in the north, we suffer tremendously bad communications. We're significantly further behind than most of our southern urban centers. So, as our internet service providers are looking to make improvements, and I was actually make a point of talking to most of them and regularly to get updates. And one of the companies that plans to roll out 5G in the north in approximately over 100, about 70 communities, indicates that they were going to be able to do so by using Huawei technology. As explained by Doug, is that it's because it's a lot cheaper. The one company, which is a consortium, said, if the government of Canada tells them not to use Huawei, technology or equipment, then they won't. But they're also trying to get government of Canada or federal subsidies to help, unroll their plan and their project, and 30% cost savings or even more, makes it greatly attractive to them. But there are those security concerns, and as far as we in the north, are concerned, we value our privacy and our security and our data just as much as Southern Canadians. And when, the large telecommunications companies, Bell, Shaw, Rogers, TELUS, have either, aren't choosing Huawei or haven't used it in their 4G rollout, we really need to be looking at this not just from a Canadian perspective, but also too is that China quite regularly looks for the weakest link, and where either the national government is just not prepared to provide the additional subsidies or funding investments to ensure that we enjoy not only the same sort of standard of let's say, access and connectivity, but that, as I said earlier, that our privacy and security and data issues are not compromised.
Jessica, I was associated with a fairly large establishment in Ottawa, and we had Huawei bid for, it was just Wi-Fi, and it was more than a 30% discount. So if it's a 30% discount, isn't that a compelling economic thing that we should be considering when putting the infrastructure in the north or anywhere across Canada?
Absolutely. And I would say that, so when it comes specifically to the north, telecommunications is one piece of a lot more critical infrastructure that is lacking in the north, and all of these pieces are connected to one another. And so when we have China, looking to build 5G and telecommunications infrastructure in the north, it doesn't just end there. They're also actively pursuing to buy mines, which are also connected to have ownership with a road, a port, airstrips and air service. And so when you start looking and trying to connect all these pieces together, and so it's not, so we're talking about all the security implications that come along with having a 5G technology that's, that's run or owned by the Chinese, but also how much, let's say, ports and therefore shipping logistics is then, is connected and is implicated by, the 5G technology, which is which is what would be in place. You could say, air service the same way in terms of logistics and operations. And so a lot of this, requires data sharing and all of these type of issues. And so it really puts Canada in a very vulnerable situation in our north when we have a lot of this critical infrastructure potentially owned and operated by the Chinese. And just to pick up a little bit on last week's conversation, we know that the North is becoming a huge global geopolitical area and region of interest for everyone. And, China has, spoken, profusely about the fact that it's a near Arctic state. And they have the Polar Silk Route. That's now, this piece of their Belt and Road Initiative. And so for them, all of this critical infrastructure around telecommunications, ports, shipping, this is all really something that's of serious importance for them. So a 30% discount, or 30% reduction in price is nothing for what they could gain for what they might, be paying less or receiving less in revenue or return, I would say.
We're chatting tonight about 5G and whether Canada should be accepting Huawei technology to build our 5G network. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with this panel in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Wire, Saga 960. So I'm having just a fascinating time learning about 5G and the implications of Huawei, potentially Chinese company investing in 5G in Canada, and particularly as it relates to implications in the North. Rob, maybe I can turn to you. I was listening to a senator in the United States being interviewed today, and he was asked what the three biggest issues were. And he said the pandemic, he said the economy, and he said the war with China. I was a little bit shocked, frankly, that the war with China was the language that granted, maybe one of the hawks in the U.S. Senate was suggesting. But are we in a war with China?
We're developing into a Cold War. There's no question when you look at both Chinese statements when they do make it, when you then look much more closely at their defense procurements, that they are mounting every step necessary to become, if not a peer competitor, the major power of the international system. And in order to do so, they, of course, have to push the Americans off the stage and all those that support the Americans. And so as we see the Chinese right now, and this, I might hasten to add, the senator you're referring to is a Republican, but the Democrats aren't saying anything all that particularly different, and that there is a general consensus within the United States on both sides of the line that, in fact, that China is going to be the next competitor, if it has not already become the major competitor to the United States.
Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada has appointed Dominic Barton, the former head of McKinsey, a fairly substantial consulting firm, and someone who we think has advised him fairly closely from an economic standpoint as the ambassador to China. Does this indicate that really Canada wants a very much closer relationship than some of our peers want with China? And is that appropriate?
There's no question whatsoever. If you look at the Five Eyes countries that are the closest for sharing information, and that's New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain, United States, and us, we are the ones that have been by far lagging in terms of pushing off from this Chinese connection. We have New Zealand that is noted for its somewhat left of center perspectives on security issues, where for the longest time they refused the American Navy to have port visits because they were against the nuclear weapons that those ships carried. Still remaining part of this ICE 5 network, they were very quick, along with the Australians and the Americans, to recognize the danger that the Chinese pose from an economic perspective. I mean, the Brits were a little bit longer in terms of recognizing the threat, but here in Canada, what we see is not really any effort to really turn around and take sort of the type of examinations or steps that these four other countries have taken. But in fact, it almost seems like every step that we're taking is trying to delay the issue area in the hopes that somehow the Canadian public may not notice that the Chinese have gone from what many saw as a potential great trading partner to probably the greatest threat that we will be facing going into the future from a military and political perspective. And so it's difficult, in fact, to see anything except for a very unexplainable connection that seems to exist between our government as opposed to the government in New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain, and the United States, in terms of recognizing the fact that, no, you can't talk about China as the new economic possibility going into the future, but you have to recognize that it is the new security threat that, as other members of the panel have made very clear, will provide whatever economic means you want to ensure that they have strategic control of strategic investments and capabilities. And I think this is something very troubling within Canada, that we don't seem to take it serious, at least from a government perspective.
Charles, I graduated from Harvard Business School in the 1980s. And at that point in time, we were all worried that Japan was actually going to take over the world. And I think that 3 of my final 8 exams were all about the threat from Japan. Is this concern about China that Rob and other people talk about realistic, or is it overblown? Is China going to take us over? And when he talks about it being not just a political, but a military threat, is he exaggerating?
No, I don't think that Rob is exaggerating. I think that China is trying to use non-traditional methods to expand its influence. And I think, if you look at why is Canada more penetrated by Chinese influence operations than Australia and New Zealand, and this is an observation made by Clive Hamilton, who is an Australian who feels that Canada is by far the most penetrated of the Western countries. I think it has to do with our political culture. You look back at the Trudeau era and before, when really our predominant concern was beating back U.S. cultural and economic dominance. So, Mr. Trudeau initiated the Foreign Investment Review Agency, and then we had the CanCon regulations on the radio and TV. And I think that he saw opening up to Cuba and to China as a way to distinguish our foreign policy from the U.S. policy, and that and therefore we developed this special relationship with China. And later, I think, as it's evolved today, it's become a question that perhaps up to the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the dominant theme in Canadian policy was putting the promotion of Canadian prosperity through investment and trade with China as our top priority, and allowing the Chinese regime to engage in behaviors that we wouldn't tolerate in other regimes in terms of human rights or support for rogue regimes or expansion in the South China Sea or pervasive cyber espionage against Canadian government and business, and Chinese agents harassing Canadians as the cost that we had to pay to ensure our market access and expansion of investment. And there are a number of important Canadian companies who have significant long-term lucrative arrangements with Chinese state firms, and the Chinese government expects or makes it clear to Canada that if we are to benefit from their market, that we have to toe the line in terms of non-economic issues. And, it's an asymmetrical relationship where China has got much more power than Canada. And so that's been the way that we've been running our policy. I think in recent times, Canadian public opinion has turned dramatically against China, and you're looking at, astonishingly single-digit figures for public support for enhanced engagement with China because of the hostage diplomacy and the violation of normal trade practices, such as the arbitrary termination of $3 billion worth of canola seed exports on false grounds of contamination in the dockage, the non-seed portion, and increasing reports of Chinese regime cultural genocidal policies against Turkic Muslims in the Northwest. But our government continues, I think, to carry on with the same general policy of not doing anything that would incur the Chinese regime's ire by, say, standing up to China with regard to their continuing import of fentanyl from small factories in South China, by not fulfilling our obligation to the Sino-British Joint Declaration on Hong Kong that Canada signed when it was lodged with the UN, that China has been violating and not providing any safe harbor to Hong Kong people who would be subject to persecution under the new national security law, or indeed sanctioning the officials that we know are complicit in the genocidal policies in China and other human rights abuse, some of whom have considerable assets here in Canada and, and family like children in the schools here and so on. So we don't do any of those things. The government's sole response to public concerns over these matters is to express concern or grave concern or issue a statement with other countries. But in terms of the kind of substantive measures that our allies are taking to try and make it clear to the Chinese regime that their pervasive flouting of the international rules-based order and diplomacy and trade is just not something that we can stand idly by and accept. We have been, really passive. And the upshot is that, we can expect further trade sanctions, and that Michael Kovrig and Michael's favor are now up to 734 days of prison hell, and our government has not done anything that we're able to detect to effectively respond to the Chinese regime and give them an incentive to release those two gentlemen. So, I think
what are we worried about? Is it just cheap goods that our consumers want to buy, or is it trade opportunities? Why are we so worried?
Well, I think that there are major firms that have, business in China, Bombardier putting in subway systems and train lines to Tibet and other large investments that the Chinese have made clear would be endangered, or at least they threaten would be endangered if Canada was to do anything with regard to Xinjiang or Hong Kong or South China Sea and so on of any substantive nature. And I would say that, as Rob was talking about New Zealand and Australia, those two places, they're highly dependent on Chinese trade, particularly New Zealand for agricultural commodities like meat and dairy in particular. It's running up, a good third of their external trade is to China. China is their largest trading partner, but yet they're prepared to stand up to it and accept the Chinese retaliation, particularly on Australia, that's recently suffered $20 billion worth of retaliation, and some more with Chinese arbitrary barring of Australian coal exports. Canada, our total dependence on the Chinese market for external trade is only 4%. It's gone under 4% since the Chinese refused to take the canola seeds. So the potential economic exposure of us to Chinese retaliation is a fraction of what it is for our allies. But yet, as Rob points out, we are the country that is most compliant with Chinese government demands on us to agree to Chinese agendas in return for this promise of expansion of trade, which incidentally, we have not, even under the Chrétien era, we saw our market share in China decline, not be enhanced as a reward for us, being less vocal and active on our concerns over Chinese violations of human rights and so on. So, we seem to be basing our China policy on a false paradigm that if we are passive and appeasing to the Chinese regime, that they will extend goodwill to us, release the Michaels, and allow us more access to their market. But objectively speaking, we haven't seen that. If our policy was so effective, then I don't think Michael Kovrig and Michael's favor would still be in prison 734 days later.
So, Jessica, what should we do? Is the Donald Trump strategy of being tough on China the right strategy?
I think it has to be multifaceted. If we turn specifically to the North, this is a region, as I was saying, that's evolving quickly. And if you look at all the other Arctic states and how their Arctic strategies have evolved over the last decade, you can see how much now they regard their own North as critical for their security, vital to their national interest. While, here in Canada, we have I guess, a policy or a framework that was put out. Passive, I think, is an understatement. And, while it makes this effort, talks about co-development, we need, more action and words. And so where is the investment? And so when it comes to these kind of uneven trade balances and in terms of commodities and et cetera, we do recognize that we have a lot of critical minerals. We've even signed a critical mineral agreement with the United States. These critical minerals are critical because they're the key to, automated vehicles and the renewable energy economy, et cetera. And a lot of those minerals are located in our north. But what are we doing? This speaks back to the TMAC conversation yesterday. What are we doing to help then our ability to get our critical mineral, economy off the ground in the north if we're not investing in the infrastructure that's there? And so instead of actually having a little bit of a leg up, something, we have what China wants, which is a lot of critical minerals. We're in a situation where actually China's the one buying the actual mines themselves and the related and supporting infrastructure around it. They should be buying from us, the minerals that have come out of the ground that have been, produced by Canadian companies. And so I think we're really asleep at the wheel. Where the world is obviously changing, in terms of the global relationship that many countries have to China, and the Arctic itself is changing geopolitically, and there we just seem to continue to muddle along without understanding how vital it is to our national security or our national interests.
But Madeline, if we muddle along and we don't realize how important it is to our national security, and we underinvest in the North for generations, and if China's willing to do it, and if China's willing to invest in gold mines and invest in communications and invest in ports, why don't we just take their money and say thank you very much?
Well, I think, I'll sort of expand on Jessica's analogy. I think it's important to realize that we may actually be handing over, the driver's seat to another country when we're talking about, critical resources or critical infrastructure. If you say we just accept, cash with no concern whatsoever about who owns that infrastructure, the human rights violations, environmental concerns, we could see this all happening within our own country. I know that when the German chancellor was visiting in town here in Iqaluit, he asked my premier if he was concerned about, the Chinese interest in our region. And the premier said, well, it's really up to the government of Canada and the prime minister and to really assess those international issues, to identify those risks, inform us, to some extent, therefore protect us. And, and that's the reality, is that we live in this sort of, complicated federation where we've got 3 different levels of government. We've got Indigenous communities, rural, remote. We don't always have, the necessary monies ourselves or even capacity to make those assessments. So we're highly dependent on Ottawa's, assistance to not only, determine what these foreign or international actors' agendas are, and especially in our own, when they want to be in our backyard. But then again, we need to have these important national conversations about, is that something that we as a country are prepared to trade off, to have massive foreign investment and foreign influence over large parts of our rural, remote parts of the country because we simply, the rest of Canada or nationally just aren't prepared to basically sort of, pay attention or care and effectively give it all away. I'm not prepared, and I hope that Ottawa and Canadians wouldn't be prepared to basically sort of see northern part of Canada, out of sight, out of mind. It's too expensive. We don't care. But then literally at some point, as Jessica explained, and as did Charles and even, Rob, then why own Canada's North? Why care about sort of, Canada's North? Or if you're just going to effectively give, ownership and control over this large part of our country. No, we're part of Canada. We need to have national assessments, national priorities, understand that, we cannot simply ignore and compromise Northerners or a big, large part of our regions because it's, we're too expensive and it doesn't matter. It does matter a lot.
We're chatting tonight about 5G and Huawei and whether we should allow them to build 5G in Canada and the security concerns about it. We're going to take a break and then come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Wow, what a fascinating conversation about 5G and a lot of implications in regards to what we should be doing, not only in part of Canada that I live in, but critically in the north, according to Jessica and Madeline. Rob, maybe I could turn to you. Madeline talked a lot about foreign investment and that maybe we just don't care. We've had FIRA in the 1960s. We've had, Petro-Canada in the 1980s. Recently, the federal government bought a pipeline to try to assuage some people's interests. Do Canadians really care? Don't they just want the economic benefits and they don't really care where the money comes from?
Well, the problem is in Canada, we're a trading nation. That's the bottom line. We're a relatively small population, very highly trained. We like our lifestyle. And as a result, there has to be ways of paying for it. And the only way that you can pay for it is, in fact, through these foreign investments, because it's shown that as much as we like it, we are also quite conservative in terms of how we approach our business interests. And as a result, risk-taking, entrepreneurship, this is something that doesn't seem to come all that terribly naturally to us within a national set of characters. And so therefore we keep, whenever, within the context of political science, whenever we're teaching it and we say, well, when we look at a country like Canada, we see us repeating these same challenges, some people would say mistakes. Well, then there's got to be institutional and functional reasons for why we keep doing this over and over and over. And it's just because of these factors of what constitutes Canada, which means we're never really ever going to solve foreign investment. But we have to always ensure that we are smart about foreign investment. And I think we're not seeing any sign of that right whatsoever with this current government, to be perfectly honest.
Jessica, would you ban Huawei?
We have, as I said last time, we have to have something in its place then. So if it's not Huawei, then what are we going to do and what is it going to be? And I think that's what we should be placing a lot of our focus on, is what we do have here in Canada. And we have a lot that other countries want. And as Rob said, we're a trading nation. Well, we have a lot to offer. We've got an abundance of resources. We've got this strategically critical region up north. We have the longest coastline in the world, but also in the in the Arctic, and this is providing access to shipping routes and lanes that people want. We need to learn how to better take advantage and profit and realize what we do have, and start doing more trade on our own terms, and not in this vulnerable situation of being at the helm of what other people dictate. So,
Madeline, what's the solution for the North? Do we need like a Marshall Plan or a national energy plan or something like that for the North?
Well, first of all, I want to say is that there are viable alternatives to Huawei technology, especially in telecommunications. Charles explained that very well. I do think absolutely we do need to see a Northern Arctic strategy, not just in telecommunications, in energy and transportation, in those big sectors. And I can tell you, as my company and my partners are moving ahead on building a fiber optic network, is that we will not use Huawei technology under no circumstance, in part because we value, the security and the privacy and data of our customers, especially if we're going to look at the network being used for military, whether it's Canadian, United States, and so we're definitely staying away from Huawei. The only thing I want to add is the big telcos in the South have made the similar commitments. The problem is that leaves the smaller companies in rural remote Canada literally having to depend potentially on Huawei technology because it's cheaper. Instead, what we need is Canadian federal subsidies that help make them, allow for different, better choices and better viable alternatives that do exist.
Charles, last word to you. What should the Canadian government do in regards to Huawei?
Oh, I absolutely agree with Madeline. I don't think it's the responsibility of our, northern telecommunications companies to pay the price of maintaining our national security. And so it's clear that it would be a bad idea to have our telecommunications in the north using this particular company because of all the reasons that I outlined. But it shouldn't be the Inuit who are paying the premium for maintaining Canadian national security. That's a federal government responsibility. And we ought to be saying to the people up in the north, well, we don't want you to use Huawei, but we do want you to get telecommunications at a price that's going to make it work for you. And therefore, we're going to provide you with the resources to make that happen using an alternative supplier that the government is confident will manage the network in a responsible, honest way. So, it's time for Ottawa to act on this and the other issues that we've discussed in the north, because we owe it to our sovereignty and to the people living up there who are citizens of Canada and should enjoy the same benefits that all of us receive by virtue of being Canadian.
Charles Burton, Rob Hubert, Madeline Redfern, and Jessica Shadian, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Real pleasure listening to your views on Huawei, 5G, Canada-China's relationships, and what Canada's relationship with our North should be. Thank you very much. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining us.